So I distinctly remember the door. One of those doors with a narrow strip of glass allowing people to see in and people inside to see out. I remember also jumping up and down and waving when the teacher in the classroom wasn't looking, all in a valiant effort to get the attention of Kristen, my best friend in grade 8. But what I remember most acutely, some 36 years later, is the heavy hand of Mr. Davis, the school's principal, as it came to rest on top of my head, bringing both my bouncing and my valiant, though ill-planned attempt to amuse Kristen to an abrupt and bitter end. Mr. Davis then boomed words that rightly caught my attention. "Son, I don't think you belong here." No, sir. He escorted me back to my class and told my teacher that I somehow seemed to have gotten lost on my way to the washroom. It could have been worse, much worse. I probably at least deserved detention. But being a good school and this being my first infraction, all I ended up with that day was some embarrassment before my classmates. As I have sat with the question of belonging recently, I've been swept back to 1983 and to that corridor at the Apollo Junior High School in Richardson, Texas. What has stayed with me across all these years is the principal's fairly obvious conclusion that I was decidedly out of place. Indeed, I wasn't where I should be, and I knew it just as well as Mr. Davis. It is a feeling that I have gotten at many points in my life, and I'm guessing you have too. A feeling of being in a place where I didn't fit, in a group where I wasn't truly welcomed, in a place I knew I did not and would not ever feel that I really belonged. This is, I would venture, a fairly common experience for most of us as Unitarian Universalists, both here within this community and beyond. With some 90% of us having come to this tradition from another faith or no religious tradition, most of us know something of what it means to be lovers of leaving, to borrow a phrase from Rumi, the Sufi poet who some 700 years ago penned the words that we often sing in that hymn around here, "Come, come, whoever you are." For much of the 20th century in Unitarian Universalism, we lovers of leaving were called come-outers, people who had come out of other religious traditions. It's why UUism is so often referred to as our chosen faith, to signify that most of us have come to it as adults by our own free choice. Which means that our detractors are actually right. We are heretics, at least in the original sense of the word, which simply means one who chooses. Now, it should be said that a few of us who grew up in this faith are sometimes annoyed by so much emphasis on having come into this tradition from another, when that, of course, isn't their experience at all. I completely honor that, but I would also say that any and all of us, each and every day, choose our faith. We choose how we will invest ourselves through our time and our energy and our money, through our trust and our devotion and our practice. We choose how we will invest ourselves in support of what we say we believe, in what nourishes our spirit, in what gives substance and sustenance to the dreams and hopes that we have for our own lives and for the world around us. We choose how we will invest ourselves in order, I think, to belong, to know ourselves as part of something larger than we alone can be. For many of us, we choose to do that here, to come together to build up in community here within these walls and beyond these walls. In our day, in this city, and in this country, this is an increasingly countercultural thing to do. It is also a creative act of hope, of love, of longing, and I would say in this moment in time, it is also an act of resistance. It is a bold thing to do to get out of bed on a Sunday morning, sometimes in foul weather, no less, to come together in religious community, especially when we don't even find in this place a set of necessarily shared beliefs, but are instead invited into a covenant, into a set of promises for how we will be with each other and in the world around us. Across the years, it has often been said from this pulpit that you belong here because you are here, and so you do. You belong here because you are here. But to truly belong requires more than simply showing up. It asks you to reach out, to connect, to engage, to volunteer. It asks you to grow by putting into practice the principles at the heart of our faith. While Unitarians don't tend to report dramatic conversion experiences, the truth is that this is a long-haul faith, and when it is practiced, it will change you over the course of time. For it involves a steady opening of the heart towards oneself and towards others in love, in compassion, and in understanding. A few years ago, I attended one of the last of the Massey lectures given by Adrienne Clarkson on the topic of belonging. Over the course of her 5 lectures, she discussed the paradox of citizenship. As an immigrant and now a citizen of Canada, I deeply appreciated her reflections on what it means to belong to this country. As a minister, there were multiple times when I thought how easily her words about Canada could also apply to our congregation and to our faith. She spoke of Canada's stunning diversity and relative harmony. She spoke of how leaders the world over are baffled by the comparative success of multiculturalism in Canada. She said pointedly that what is hard for people from most other nations to understand is that we do not treat people as outsiders because they are different from us. We have learned over the past 40 years how to accept differences because we ourselves are different. While her assessment of Canada is still a bit aspirational, I think, she points to the commitment to hospitality and inclusion as the central guiding values that have shaped and continue to shape life in this country when we are at our best. What most strikes me, though, is her point in that it unmistakably echoes God's admonition to the Jews in the Torah to not oppress the stranger, reminding them that they themselves were once strangers in a strange land. Thou shalt neither vex nor oppress a stranger, for ye were once strangers in the land of Egypt. It is a fitting commandment for this country comprised of immigrants and for this faith comprised of so many come-outers. It is a call to a noble and ancient ethic by which those who've most recently arrived are taken in by those who've been around a while longer. Such an ethic seemingly defies so much of what we know of human competition and the survival of the fittest. It begs the question of what could possibly ground such an ethic of kindness, of what could inspire such acts of radical welcome and inclusion. And it invites us to wonder at how different our world and our lives just might be if the circle of belonging were extended ever wider. A couple of years ago, Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi told the story of speaking at a community forum on welcoming Syrian refugees to the city. He said, "I was a little bit nervous walking in because it was an open invitation. Anybody could come. And I thought there might be some angry people or people with a lot of very difficult questions. And who was there were churches and synagogues and temples and mosques and grandmothers and volunteers and people from across the community who were just asking the same question, which is, he says, by the way, still the most common question I get. How can I help? And at one point he says a First Nations woman stood up, and he says, I only knew that because she said, I am a First Nations woman. I thought she was going to say, why are we having all of this focus on these refugees when we have so many problems closer to home? But what she actually said was, I need some help, because I need to understand how and when they're coming, because I want to make sure, and many of my First Nations colleagues want to make sure, that when these people come, when they arrive, we have an opportunity to have the elders there, to drum them in and do a smudge ceremony so that we can welcome them to this land. Nietzsche understandably says that that is the point when he lost it. Early on in her lectures, Adrienne Clarkson quoted the testimony of Grand Chief John Kelly before the Royal Commission on the Northern Environment in 1977, where he described how the Ojibwe were cheated by Treaty 3, originally signed in 1873 by the Ontario government while the federal government looked on. Despite his people being cheated, he makes the point that we work together by enlarging, by allowing more people to join the circle. It is that commitment to the ever-enlarging circle that has become Canada that Clarkson, like her husband John Ralston Saul, credits to the Indigenous peoples of this land. Chief Kelly said, "It appears that as the years go by, the circle of the Ojibwe just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Canadians of all colors and religions are entering the circle. You might feel you have roots somewhere else, but in reality, you are right here with us." The chief then goes on to speak powerfully about our interdependence. "I do not know if you feel the throbbing of the land in your chest, and if you feel the bear is your brother with a spirit purer and stronger than yours, or if the elk is on a higher level of life than are humans. You may not share the same spiritual anguish as when I see the earth ravaged by a stranger, but you can no longer escape my fate as the soil turns barren and the rivers poison. Much against my will and probably yours, time and circumstance have put us together in the same circle. And so I come not to plead with you to save me from the monstrous stranger of capitalist greed and technology. I come to inform you that my danger is your danger too. My genocide is your genocide." For better and for worse, in words he spoke 42 years ago, Chief Kelly holds up the ways we are bound together by the threats and the challenges that we face. He points to our shared vulnerability and the deep need for us to recognize that all of us are knitted together for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. It is the inescapable network of mutuality, as Dr. King called it. It is the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, as our seventh principle teaches. If there is anything that defines sin from a Unitarian Universalist perspective, it is our capacity to lose sight of the ties that bind us one to another and to all of life. When we forget that we share a common destiny, when we forget that we too were once strangers in a strange land, when we forget that we belong to each other and think that we can somehow manage better on our own, set apart from the web of life itself. It can be a tempting story to tell, to imagine that we are fully self-sufficient, self-made, in control, and on top of everything. It can even work out for a time to seem true. But the hard truth of this world is that we are all vulnerable, susceptible as any other to life's hardships and its heartaches. This being human means that we all face material, emotional, and spiritual needs that we cannot fully, wholly fulfill on our own. And so we live in a web of interdependence with everyone and everything else. For me, the clearest sign of spiritual maturity is when a person recognizes and has a deep awareness that we are in need and that we are needed. For the recognition of our interdependence is the great covenant at the heart of life. When our religious ancestors, the English Puritans, landed on the shores of this continent nearly 4 centuries ago, they recognized that they were truly reliant on one another for their very survival. They established formal written covenants with one another to ensure their mutual well-being. Such covenants were vital as these early settlers faced an uncertain future in a strange and often hostile land. The shift within our faith in more recent years toward a renewal of the role of covenant among us is really a return to our earliest roots on this continent. As in days of old, our congregations can be religious laboratories for learning how best to contend with the challenges we face with courage, grace, and resilience. But only if we deepen our ties with one another, only if we open our hearts, only if we are willing to be real about the vulnerabilities we share. May we, who have known in whatever way what it means to be strangers in a strange land, harness that feeling of not quite fitting in, that feeling of alienation or isolation, and then use it with fierce and loving devotion to build up in this place a truly welcoming home for all. So may it be.